Okay, so we are going to be discussing the multidisciplinary view of poverty through economics, sociology, and public health. We're going to first start with the public health view. I am Lauren Henthorn, and I'm going to be talking about how public health approaches the issue of poverty. So specifically, public health kind of focuses on the health aspect, which kind of makes sense. And when discussing this issue, it specifically will bring in problems such as the access to healthy foods, healthcare, and personal hygiene. So specifically, if you are food secure, if you have access to personal hygiene items, and if you can afford healthcare either through insurance or through out-of-pocket payments. So some key concepts and questions or theories that I have noticed throughout um, public health research in this area. One of the biggest things was food security, and that's just whether an individual or household can afford a balanced diets of nutritional foods. So if they can afford fruits and veggies on a regular basis and eat a balanced diet of like proteins, dairy, stuff like that. And then health inequalities is another big aspect, which brings in access to health insurance, but also different access based on social status. So those in a wealthier social status will have better access to healthcare and can afford the best healthcare, while those who are low income might not be able to afford any healthcare. And if they do, it might be the worst that there is. Some examples of how public health produces knowledge is through data analysis, statistics, policies, interviews, stuff like that. They use both qualitative and quantitative data. And in order for the research in public health to be considered viable, they must include four domains of knowledge, which include distribution of health, determinants, consequences, and intervention methods. So they want to make sure they include aspects of how the healthcare is distributed to all members of the society, whether it's through insurance or out of pocket, stuff like that. They want to include interventions on how to make sure everybody is getting equal access to healthcare. They want to look at the consequences of when you don't have access to healthcare and healthy options for foods and stuff. They want to include that aspect. And the reason they include all of this is to make sure that they can fully analyze the problem instead of just focusing on one area. And then some insights from the podcast and some personal sources I found. For the podcast, they specifically were discussing the changing policies in the government right now when it comes to affordable food for low-income families. And this was specifically discussing SNAP benefits. And they were also discussing how the government is putting in policies that are restricting the benefits and making it more difficult for families to get these benefits, even if they truly do need them. And there is also evidence to show that these benefits have been reducing poverty, but the government is reducing funding to these programs to use for other stuff. And then, and one of the sources I found, which was on health.gov, the specific issues and impact on health were discussed. And the authors explained that access to healthcare, access to healthy food, and even the prevalence of violence all contribute to worsening health in low incomes. It's not just, normal health problems. It's also their situation that is causing the health to be worse, which also in turn increases poverty. And these are all the sources I used.
Alrighty, my name's Harrison, and I'm going to be talking about the issue and approach on poverty in regards to economics and how to tackle that issue. So first, I wanted to give a definition on how economic approaches the issue of poverty. So economics view poverty as a condition where individuals or households lack sufficient income or resources to meet basic needs such as food, shelter, education, healthcare, etc. It seeks to identify the cause of poverty, measure its prevalence, design policies to reduce it. So here's some key concepts and theories that I wanted to tackle before going into other issues. So the first one is poverty traps, which I used a diagram down there as a visual reference. So poverty traps are cycles in which low income leads to low savings and poor investment in education, health, which reinforces poverty. And then next, there's the human capital theory, which is basically an investment in education and health that improves productivity and earning potential for people impoverished. And then there's the concept of welfare economics and income distribution, which analyzes how resources are distributed and how to maximize social welfare. So here's some more key concepts, questions, and theories. First, I'm going to talk about absolute poverty versus relative poverty. So first, I'll give a definition of relative poverty, including some features and an example. So, in relation to the economic status of other people in society is what relative poverty is. And then a person is in relative poverty if their income is significantly below the national average or median, which means they cannot afford to participate fully in everyday life. Some key features of relative poverty are reflections in inequality within a society. The common benchmark for relative poverty is earning less than 50 to 60% of the national median income, focuses on social exclusion and not just survival. It's more prevalent in developed countries where basic needs are met, but disparity in living standards exist. So an example of this would be someone in the United Kingdom of someone earning less than 60% of the median income, and they may be unable to afford internet access, school supplies, or transport, making it hard to fully engage in society. So now I'm going to talk about absolute poverty, which is it's more prevalent in third world countries and less developed countries. It is a fixed threshold that refers to a fixed minimum standard of living. A person is in absolute poverty if they do not have enough income to meet basic needs such as food, clean water, and shelter. And this is regardless of where they live. A key feature is that it's measured using a universal poverty line, often by international organizations. So the most common benchmark is from the World Bank's threshold, and this is a statistic as of 2023 that living on less than $2.15 a day is considered absolute poverty. This line is designed to capture extreme deprivation and used to assess poverty in developing countries. So the example I use for this is that if a person, oops. If a person is living in rural Uganda, earns less than $2.15 a day, and they can't afford basic food or medicine, they are considered to be in absolute poverty. So here's a couple questions that I wrote up about economics and poverty. The first one is, what are the economic incentives and disincentives faced by the poor? So the first one I have is work and income opportunities. When job opportunities exist, the poor are incentivized to participate in the labor market to increase their income and escape poverty. The second one I had is access to credit or savings with financial tools like microloans or mobile banking, encourages entrepreneurship and long-term planning. And there's subsidies, which includes food, housing, or energy subsidies to reduce immediate costs and free up income for other uses. And then we have education and training, which is if returns to school are perceived as high, families are incentivized to keep children in school. The second question I had are what are the effects of cash transfers, microloans, and minimum wages? So first, there's two types of cash transfers. There's conditional cash transfers and unconditional cash transfers. Unconditional cash transfers give money directly to the poor with no strings attached. And then conditional cash transfers require certain behaviors, like kids in school. Some positive effects of cash transfers are that they improve food security, school attendance, and investment in small businesses. And it's very rare that there's ever any evidence of misuse with cash transfers. Next, I have microloans. The goal of microloans is to provide small loans to the poor to start grow businesses. And then some positive effects of microloans is that there's evidence of increased business activity and autonomy, especially for women. And then this was taken from a study done by Dr. Banerjee, who said there's mixed results that show that there's modest or no sustained income gains, and sometimes increased stress due to debt. The risk of microloans is that there's over-indebtedness and social pressure in group lending models. All right, so here I'm going to talk about how knowledge is produced in economics. I have three general methods here. The first one is just quantitative methods, which are some examples of this would be econometrics, regression analysis, and RCTs, which are randomized controlled trials. We also have large-scale data sets like national household surveys or global databases. There's also field experiments as a method. Economists like Esther Duflo and Banerjee, like I mentioned earlier, uses randomized controlled trials to test poverty and interventions. There's also methods like models and stimulations which predict how changes in policy like tax welfare may impact poverty levels. So here's some insights from podcasts and other additional sources. The first source I used was from two different podcasts. The Ezra Klein Show. Ezra Klein is a journalist and political commentator, and his episodes have explored structural issues such as systemic racism or regional underinvestment, which highlights that poverty is not just an individual failing, but often rooted in policy and history. And then Freakonomics Radio highlights how simple nudges or small-scale cash transfers can significantly affect outcomes like school attendance or healthcare usage. Some other additional sources, like I mentioned earlier, are the World Bank and IMF reports, which stress that economic growth alone isn't enough. Inclusive growth and targeted redistribution are key. Oh. Studies also show how unconditional cash transfers can be more effective than conditional ones, challenging older assumptions about aid dependency. And then listed here, I have all of my references and works cited.
Okay, I'm Maddie. I'm doing the sociology approach on poverty. So how sociology approaches the issue of poverty. Sociology views poverty as the result of an unfair system, which will create limited access to certain things and opportunities, such as jobs and housing. Race and gender and social status are major contributors when it comes to an individual's poverty level, and just the overall opportunities they can receive. And we switch to the next page, where is it? Up there. So sociology continued some key concepts, questions, or theories. First, there's social stratification. This is just a way of classifying individuals into rankings or levels based on their education, power, and wealth status, and just overall social status. There is social mobility, which is an individual's ability to move up or down the ladder in social class and whether they have the ability to move up or down. Um, some questions are, how does gender, race, and power affect an individual's poverty level? So individuals who are minorities, such as people of color, women, or individuals with less power, these individuals tend to have less access to certain resources, and therefore they are most likely to be affected or experience poverty the most. Um, and some reasons why it may be so difficult for people to escape poverty are factors like the housing market being too high and individuals can't have a safe place to live, lower than average income for individuals in a community and poor social status. And these all make it increasingly difficult for individuals um, who are experiencing poverty to be able to escape it. So, some examples of how knowledge is produced in sociology. Surveys and data. These are used to help us discover trends in poverty by gathering information from individuals, different communities, and just observing how different races, genders, and social status are affected by poverty and um, how these compare to higher social status and different communities. Case studies are also done to observe different communities and to look at specific communities to really understand how poverty is present in each of these communities and how these communities are also affected by this poverty. So, some insights and findings from the podcast that we were given. This discussed a lot of different contributors of poverty that have major impacts. So, two of the major ones from the podcast were the housing industry and that it is far too high, which make it difficult for the individuals to find good housing, and then all their money is going to the housing, and it doesn't leave much else. And the government policies are also usually favored toward the wealthy. So the poor people in poverty usually are lacking when it comes to the government policies. Overall policy is the result of an unfair system, so it's not solely based on individual actions. And many of the reasons poverty is still so prevalent is due to the system and how it is structured, not just individuals. Another source that I found was from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and this source really just emphasized how inequality is becoming more of an issue and how the wealthy individuals will continue to flourish and become richer while the rest are just experiencing the rate of poverty just overall increase.
Okay, so throughout the research that we did on these three domains, we found that there were some similarities and some differences. So all three domains seem to focus on the theme of inequalities in society when it comes to the poverty lines. They all recognize the issue of poverty being related to societal structure and governmental structure and not the low-income families themselves. And some differences we saw were that economics is more focused on like the income aspects, so they have more importance on the wages and incomes that families are making. And then public health focuses more on the health aspect, so access to healthcare and food security. And then sociology focuses on the societal aspect, so social status and industries contributing to poverty.
All right, so here's an interdisciplinary understanding of poverty. The first point we made in understanding poverty is that poverty affects everyone, not just the impoverished and low income. It is also a societal and economic issue, like Lauren was talking about on the last slide. And then poverty also requires integration through sociological context, economic data, and public health evidence to design policies to tackle poverty. Some examples of this for each subject would be income levels in labor markets, societal norms and structures, and disease prevalence and malnutrition.
Go back a slide, you accidentally skipped one.
Sorry, I'm having some issues.
So, the importance of an interdisciplinary view. The interdisciplinary view helps to incorporate multiple fields of knowledge to help fully understand an issue. Using the knowledge of more people allows us to ensure that no group is left out of consideration when developing a plan or a solution. And a multifaceted approach that involves collaboration across disciplines ultimately allows for discussion of problems that one discipline alone may not have considered.